Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly and I'm a mixed media artist who specializes in gouache paint, ink work, and sometimes I do other stuff because I have too many hobbies. Yeah. So in this week's video, I'm going to be showing you how I painted this lily design on this Coach bag. Alright, so first things first is I'm cleaning the Coach bag, and what I'm using is this cleaner that came with a kit from Angelus Leather Paints. I have the materials linked down below. If you are interested in trying out the same materials I use, I definitely recommend Angelus Paints. But however, in their primary color paint kit, they have this stuff that it just smells like a nail polish remover, and once I ran out of this, that is exactly what I used. Do not use industrial strength acetone by any means, but honestly, acetone that you just use for nail polish remover should work to not only clean the surface on the leather, but to help remove some of the original finish. With the original finish on the leather removed, this will allow the acrylic paint to better adhere to the leather and provide better flexibility and durability to the bag. So what I do to create these designs is I take a picture of the bag, I draw over them in Procreate, and I use that as my reference photo essentially to then apply the design onto the bag itself in real life. What I'm doing right here is using just the white pigment as an underpainting. I'm not doing completely solid white. What I'm doing is I'm allowing thinner areas to show through to the color of the leather. That way when I paint on top, I have a good map of all the values and where the shadows are going to go, where the highlights are going to go. And as I do further layers of acrylic paint, I'm doing very thin layers. So these are all going to build upon each other, and that original map is going to help me out significantly. Another reason why I start off with white is because I want to block out the original color that is on the purse, especially with darker colors of leather, like black. I want to block that out. That way, the colors I'm trying to put onto the design really show through and they look saturated. For the first few layers of paint, I block in the local color. So for the leaves, obviously they're green, so I just use a basic green color with a thin application so that you still see the values I established in the underpainting. And I did the same thing for the areas in the lily petals that are going to get some more green and yellow towards the center of them, especially as they go towards the center of the flower. There's going to be a lot more green and yellow present. I also did the same thing with a thin layer of purple that I mixed together to be kind of like a muddy, deep purple, almost gray. And I used that in areas where there's going to be some shadows in the petals. Once I did that, I kind of used this as like a underpainting of color. So I'm basically tinting everything. And once I did that, I applied white over the top to blend it all out, which made everything look more seamless and blended together. Then I'm getting into some more details. I'm refining more of the cast shadows across the petals. I'm also emphasizing some areas that may have gotten lost in the petals where I applied the white paint again. I'm going back and forth basically a lot with different colors just to ensure that the gradients are really smooth and blended rather than looking splotchy, which can happen when you do a very thin layer of acrylic paint and just kind of leave it. You want to do multiple layers going back and forth so that it looks more seamless and blended thoroughly. I wound up changing how I do this part later when I do the back, and then I go back to the front and edit it. But the antenna thingies, I basically blocked those out with green. I just did a basic green color and did little lines for the antenna thingies, and then I kind of blocked in where the bulbs at the end go. I used a nail art brush for a lot of that really detailed work. I'm also using that nail brush to go in with the green color with a little bit of black in it and a lot of white. So basically, I mixed the green I had for the leaves together with a very light gray color. And what this did is it created more of like a light sage green. It's a little bit desaturated. And I'm using that in areas of the high points across the leaves, as well as the antenna thingies. For the back of the purse, I did essentially the same thing. I did end up adjusting the colors on the front part of the purse to match the back a little bit better. I felt like my work was a lot better looking on the back side, so I wound up, after finishing the back, going back to the front, editing it a little bit and whatnot. But for the most part, it's the same process. I cleaned off the surface with a little bit of acetone, and I'm beginning my underpainting using just white acrylic paint from the brand Angelus. And I'm initially using a lot more water and then building that up in areas where there's going to be more highlights, and letting the paint stay sheer in areas where there's going to be more shadows and showing more of that black coming through from the leather. Just like I did on the front, I just mixed together a green color. I did desaturate the green I used on the back a little bit more than I did on the front. I think that's why I went back in and edited some things on the front a little bit. Anyways, I got a slightly desaturated green, which means I added a tiny bit of gray to it. And I did a very thin coat across all the leaves and an even thinner coat in areas on the petals towards the center of the flower, where those white petals are going to get more yellow and then eventually to green the closer to the stem that they get. I then mixed together a darker version of that same green with just some black mixed in, and I applied that in areas on the leaves where there's going to be cast shadows. I then used a similar purple color that is kind of muddy from the starter kit in the primary color set that Angelus Paint has. When you mix together the primary red and blue, it makes a very muddy, kind of ugly purple color. It looks almost gray. So I'm using that for the really cooler toned kind of shadows going on, especially in areas where there's petals overlapping other petals. So I mixed together that same color and put it on the cast shadow areas, little ripples across the petals, as well as the underside of petals as they're curling underneath themselves. Because when things move away from direct light, they tend to get cooler in color. I'm building up that green gradient towards the center of the petals, and then I finished off that gradient with more of a defined green line in the center. A lot of lilies tend to have that. It's kind of like where it connects to the stem, and that's why I use a lot of thin layers of paint. not just for ensuring flexibility in the medium as the leather folds and moves with wear, but it also ensures kind of like this glazing look. A lot of people do that with oil painting. Doing thin glazes makes really soft gradients and just makes a really seamless blend between colors in the paint. As I'm getting more detailed, I'm going back in with a very, very small brush. Not my nail art brush quite yet. I saved that for the very last portion of the painting, but I'm using a detail brush and I'm getting that same muddy purple color in areas where I have those shadows established. I'm defining them further where the shadow is the closest to the object that's casting the shadow, so directly underneath the petal. That way the layer I applied beforehand kind of acts as like a blur. As shadows get closer to the object that is casting the shadow, it gets darker and more defined. So I'm basically just doing that here. Once I have the general color of the petals totally done, I'm applying some thin glazes of the white paint to accentuate the rippling effect across the petals. I'm using a liner brush to create those antenna things. Please tell me what those are called, by the way. I'm too lazy to Google it right now. And I just used a really dark green to establish those in the center of the flowers, and then I go back in with a lighter green and then eventually white to highlight those and shade them. Then I'm using my nail art brush, and like I did previously on the front side of the purse, I created a desaturated kind of sage green color by making that same green and adding a little bit of light gray to the mix. I'm using the liner portion of the nail art brush to create veins across the leaves, and I'm using the details of those leaves to create some cool swirling designs, and I'm also using that as a way to highlight them as well. I'm doing this by outlining the ridges of the leaves and just enhancing certain areas where the veins would be on. Once I'm done with this painting, I let it sit for a little bit, and then on each side I apply a satin glaze to top coat the painting. And I really like doing a satin glaze because it's not too glossy, but it's just glossy enough to make this really look like it's almost printed onto the leather, but better. It kind of reads like an oil painting. It really looks like it has that kind of glow about it. Anyways, if you guys liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. Consider maybe subscribing a little bit, maybe sort of, kind of. That'd be awesome. And I'll see you next week. Bye!